So, Woody Allen, one of the most prolific filmmakers of all time, is back with yet another movie. And I'm a fan of the guy's work. He's made some fantastic movies in his time. However, lately his insane pace has slowed down a little bit, and I feel like the quality of his films has dipped a bit as well. With that being said, I still enjoyed his last movie, and I was looking forward to seeing this as well. Speaking of which, if I did the math correctly, I think this was the 21st movie of his I've seen, which I believe is still less than half of his filmography, and that's ridiculous. But anyway, this time around the story follows a neurotic Jewish man on a trip to Europe. His wife works for a publicity firm and her client is the star of a local film festival. And basically this whole movie takes place around that festival, and that's pretty much it for the basic setup here. But of course, in typical Alan fashion, we do get basically all the classic themes you'd expect from his movies at this point. There's romance, there's affairs, there's significant age gaps between the people involved. There's also the typical musical score you'd expect, and of course the main character constantly narrates the events. It's all there, it all feels very familiar, but usually he offers some sort of unique twist to his movies. Something to make one very distinct from his other movies, even if they all share a lot of similarities. This one though, I kinda feel like lacks that element, and it feels a bit bland and, dare I say, even uninspired. At least that was my initial impression of the movie, but it did change a little bit as the movie went along. Because while on the surface that might actually be true, if you pay attention, there's a few things about this that feel a bit atypical and different. First of all, the comedy isn't nearly as prevalent as it usually is, and it's not quite as sharp as I'm used to it being either. Second, the movie is not as quick and energetic, and it never gets quite as hectic and convoluted as most of his movies do. This one is a lot more toned down and mellow. It feels almost more like a drama than a comedy. And truth be told, this just has a certain mature air about it that most of his movies lack. The characters aren't quite as eccentric as they usually are, they aren't quite as reckless either. The age gap that I mentioned between the love interests is probably narrower than it's ever been. And the movie doesn't even have any sort of crazy or wild ending and last act either. It's all very grounded and measured, at least by Woody Allen standards. So in that way, this does actually end up feeling very different from his other movies. And it also gives it a sort of melancholy tone, and I really think this feels like an end of an era somehow. And I'm perfectly willing to admit that I might be reading too much into this, to be honest, because I hate when people project their own views of a movie onto the filmmaker and think they understand his intent. But as someone who has seen over 20 of the man's movies, and considering the fact that, well, it's very clear that the male protagonist in his movies is usually some sort of reflection of the man himself, I don't think it's a stretch to say that's the case here too, and that he expresses himself through this character. And this particular character is a writer, he's working on a novel and he's very ambitious about it. And one of the things he makes very clear is that he doesn't want to just put out another book. He wants to make a masterpiece, and if it's not a masterpiece, it's not worth putting out at all. Which is very interesting, considering that has definitely not been Woody's approach in his career. In fact, his approach has been the exact opposite. He does his thing, puts out a movie a year, and sometimes it's phenomenal and sometimes it's not quite that. So, is Alan saying he wants to make a masterpiece, work on something a bit different that takes more time? I don't know. As I said, I might just be seeing things that aren't there. But he also doesn't currently have a movie in production for the first time in decades. So make what you will of that, but I think that at least made this movie a bit more interesting to me personally. Now with that being said, it's just not a great movie and far from Alan's best work. It's not particularly sharp, and that trademark snappy wit seems to be all but gone. So all things considered, I don't think I can give this one anything more than a very low 6. Boop. However, would I recommend it? Not really, but if you're a fan of Alan's movies, it might be worth a shot. So probably skip this one, or don't, after all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic.